Hello guys, it's Peter from PS Sound, and this is now part 6 of this Golf GTI Mark 8 project we had a few weeks ago when you had a daily updates, which was, yes, a bit tiring for me to edit all the videos and share it with you, but ultimately I wanted you to understand what goes into even a simple system we do, which this project is pretty similar like we did a year ago with the mk8 when we tried to share pretty much everything. And on that basis now, this part is about the RTA results of the speakers in the car, and this is going to break it down exactly how the whole system got together, how we make all these speakers play together. So if you are really interested in proper in-depth content to understand what goes into a sound quality card, then stay with us. If you just, you are only interested in marketing bullshit, then skip away. This video is going to be very boring for you possibly, because it's very geeky and very complex. But if you want to learn what goes into it and how our systems sound different than possibly most of the shops do, simple little systems. To be fair, it shouldn't matter whether it's a simple system or it's a proper high-end competition system. All cars should get this treatment to make sure that what you get from the speakers is optimized and is tuned properly. So in the upcoming probably 20-30 minutes, when I'm going to go through everything, you will get to see every single driver, what it does and what I managed to get out of them. And ultimately, once you understand this, it will make even more sense when you will see the next part coming tomorrow with the owner, when we handed the car over and he shared his thoughts about his whole journey, where he started it a few months ago, how he went through a few shops and how he ended up at our place, and of course what he thought about the end result. So get your popcorn and your drink out and then enjoy the following half an hour.
Here we go, guys. Before we kick off, I have to advertise our GoFund page. Eddie said to definitely mention this because we are collecting money for buying Zox for Eddie, right? Joking aside, no, what I want to advertise, guys, is Patreon. Not because I want to make money out of it, but it definitely helps if you support us. But you have so much to learn from that page, where I can share so much more content than just on YouTube, because YouTube takes a lot of time to edit videos and everything, whereas over there I can just upload videos without any editing. The whole meaning of that is the content, not the fancy looking editing and whatnot. So check it out, because there's so much more content over there. You can see more RTA measurements from different projects. You can also learn about weekly topics. We talk about the deep stuff when it comes to sound quality in cars, and we can show daily behind the scene content as well that I can't do on a daily basis on YouTube. The channel is just not big enough to focus on that. I have to deal with the business, clients, orders, installation and everything. So Patreon is the place where I can dump a lot of stuff, and you have tons of information over there that you can learn from. So now we want to focus on this situation, because this is the part that makes the biggest difference when it comes to a good sounding system and just something that has a lot of kit dumped into it, a lot of expensive equipment. It may look fancy, but it may sound mediocre or shit. I may use that word quite often, and it sounds a bit harsh, but the reality is that this is where the difference happens. So you can see I had many measurements from this Golf, just to get a picture about what's really happening. Let's clear everything and start from the beginning, so you get to understand everything. So this was left tweeter, and because a right-hand driven car, this is the passenger side. As you could see from the installation, we didn't go for super on axis because we wanted to keep everything looking more, we can't say factory when you have custom pillars, but it blends in better. The installation on the pillars don't look like it's a huge tumor, too intrusive, and it doesn't block the view. Yes, it helps that we used smaller format drivers, and we could push them further out into the inside of the pillar. But the tweeters were on passenger side around 20 degree off axis, the mids a bit more off axis, and on driver's side the tweeters were on 40 degree off axis, left right tweeter. So that's the one. So as on passenger side, the tweeter is more on axis, you can see it gets to play further up in the range before it starts to roll off. Whereas on driver's side, where it was more off axis, it starts to roll off earlier, as you can see. It starts to roll off at around 11.5, whereas where it's more on axis, it's linear up to 15k, and then it starts to roll off. It's not bad at all. If it was more on axis, it could play even further up without any EQ work. This is the raw measurement on the tweeter with a 1 kHz high pass filter on it, on normal measurement level where you play the system at like 85-90 dB with ping noise. You can't make any harm to the tweeter. So what we can see from this is that the tweeter starts to play from pretty low, 1.7k. So that would give many options when it comes to finding the right crossover point between mid and tweeter. But just because it starts to play really well from 1.7, you would never want to cross a tweeter over there. There are many videos in the tuning playlist. I drop a link to that in description, and you can find many videos, many measurements, RTA measurements and explanations. Also on Patreon, I have long videos about finding the right crossover points for speakers, so we don't go too deep into that. But as you can see, it's pretty linear. Now we are on a 5 dB scale, and that peak is not enormous at all. So I could see that from passenger side, the tweeter has a very healthy response I will have an easy job with. Then on driver side, we have a bigger peak here, but still, you know, we are not looking at 10-15 dB huge peaks, no cancellations or whatsoever. It starts to roll off earlier, but we will deal with that. Then I measured the mids on the pillars full range with a 100 Hz high pass filter. And these MS30s, these have pretty good response all the way up. As you can see, their breakup point is at like 19k, whereas most widebands would have their breakup at around 14-15k, which creates that kind of fake top-endy character that it plays in the top end, but it's not quite natural on many widebands. Whereas this one has the breakup further up, pretty much out of the audible range. Most people can't hear anything above 16-17k, and even above 10k, it's pretty linear. It has a bit of a dip above 3k because the drivers are off axis, but once you have these on 10-20 degree off axis, pretty much bang on axis, they play anything above 3k even better with more level, and you can get good results with these MS30 drivers, even tweeterless. Of course, as I always say, it's always better to have a tweeter. At the low end, it came alive pretty low, which is also thankfully to the construction. We always make sure that the drivers have plenty of airspace. We don't block them up and suffocate them. We let them breathe behind the pillar down to the dash, and it's a very, very healthy response. Which way can we? 2 dB scale, it's just a bit more confusing, but 5 dB scale, it's easy to see that these drivers function on the pillar from 150. You could easily use it up to 6-7k without any problems, but if you don't want to boost that lower high frequency range on it, then 3k is a healthy point to cross it at. That is not huge peak, yes, depending on where you select the target line. 53, 62, that's 9 dB, but that's characteristic in most cars. Once you have speakers up on the pillar on the dash, you will have a lot of boost between 200 and 500 Hertz in most cars, so that's just fine. Again, just because it comes alive at 150, you don't want to cross it that low. Okay, you could. For competition levels, if you only listen to it like at 85-90 dB, it won't do any harm to the speaker, but if you want to blast, you definitely want to cross it higher. But this is a very healthy response from a 3-inch on the pillar, 100%. Then the other side, as you see, it's matching pretty close, which is what we all want, because then we will have easier life tuning it and getting great imaging in a car. Again, comes alive 150-ish, and yeah, up to 3-4k easy job, absolutely easy job. But again, as you see, that right is more off axis from the listener. This also has less level on the top end, but the breakup, interestingly, shows up more. But that's okay. So on to mid bass. Always the most difficult part in any system. I always say mid bass is a real, I don't want to swear, but that's tough to get right in a car. So passenger side mid bass always plays lower, has more level from listening position, and those MSS6s in the doors starts to play from pretty low. I've seen mid bass that has more level below 50 Hertz, but it's not needed. You know, it has very healthy level from 40 Hertz. Happy days. What more do you want from a 6.5? You're never gonna play it that low, or you shouldn't, unless you don't have a sub, and then you are considerate about output levels, how far you can push a mid bass if you cross it that low, or you let it play without a high pass filter. But there wasn't anything shoutingly bad. It has very healthy level, and clean up to 350, 400 Hertz. Then yes, we have issues, but I don't care about that anymore because we have a mid-range, and by then that's not going to be a problem at that area. However, driver's side is the real challenge all the time. In hatchbacks or pretty much in any car with a mid-bass driver in a door location, you will have a cancellation point somewhere in between 60 or 100 Hertz. A big cancellation point where you can play that frequency on that single driver and you hardly hear it. You open the door, you may hear it, you shut it, it's gone, it gets muted. Which is due to the cabin size, the dimensions of the cabin. There's one point where the direct and reflected sound is just gonna not add up. They want, those two direct and reflected sound, they just cancel each other out at the listening position. And this car, yes, from driver's side mid bass has a cancellation in between 60, 80-ish, lowest point at 67. Yeah, you play 67 Hertz in this car, it's muted. Then again, it shows up a bit of a problem at 155, but overall up to 400 Hertz, yes, pretty good level. Then it becomes pretty shit. So again, when I share the video, which is in description, guys, if you want to check that and learn why I don't suggest to use a mid bass with a tweeter in a conventional way in a car in factory locations, why it's better to use, let's say, a wideband or a mid-range or anything like that. That breaks it down pretty nicely too, but it shows here as well, above 400 Hertz you have big problems. And then also if you have a passenger or anything, even your leg affects the response heavily above 400 Hertz. It will look completely different if there's a passenger there, or you put your leg in front of the driver, which is in the door. So yeah, no, you don't want a mid bass to play above 400. So that's mid bass, but pretty healthy level in terms of sensitivity, what comes out of it. Then sub. So we had that JRTW5 in the back of the Golf. It peaks in between 43, 48, highest point at 46, classic for this size cabin. The shorter the cabin, usually the higher it peaks. It could peak at like 50. In the Suzuki we have for Mrs. that peaks at like 53, 55. It's good for SPL. It's not great for the low-lows. And this one as well with that slim sub in a small-ish sealed box, it's okay. Down to 30-ish, then it drops off the cliff. But that's fine. It's pretty good. But also that cancellation area between 60 and 70 appears even with the sub from the back at listening position. So this car just doesn't like that area at all with these given speaker locations, and that's what people have to focus on. Speaker locations are the most important part in any car. No matter what speaker you use, how great DSP or tuner you have, if the speaker location is shit, you can't fight against it. You can treat, you know, surrounding areas, the peaks, but if you have a cancellation, game over. So this sub was measured with a high crossover point. So once we have a crossover on it, it won't play that high. But I just wanted to see what's happening where it peaks and whether we have a cancellation or not. We have. It is what it is. Even if we change the sub at the back, again, you could have way more expensive sub. Smaller, bigger, it doesn't matter. That would still have the same cancellation from that location. So it's not due to the application, whether it's sealed or ported or anything like that. It's the location relative to the listening position. Hopefully people get it. I try to explain everything in a really, really simple manner. Hopefully it goes through. So once I measured everything, then I could decide where I would select crossover points, and that cancellation was determining where I would cross the mid bass. So I made two presets for the owner where the mid bass was crossed at 60 Hz with the sub on one preset, and on the other preset it was crossed at 80 just for daily craziness. When you cross the system up front at 80, then this area is always going to be a bit problematic because the sub at the back is not going to support this range. So that's a bit of a sacrifice in this car, but there's not much you can do with it unless you start chopping and cutting and putting speakers to the right locations. But that wasn't the case in this. This is a simple daily car, brand new as well, and the owner is more than happy with what he's got. But yeah, this is rather something that's more important for competitors. So I think I crossed the mids at around 200-ish and up at 3K, and then I had to select a target line. I always tell to people not to drag too much to the negatives, because then you will crash the dynamics in the system, and equally you don't want to boost more than 3, 4, 5 dB to the positives unless you really have to. So you have to find a target line which is going to be somewhere in between. So I went with a 57 or 58 dB target line. I think it was 58. And then once you EQ the system, then you get rid of that big peak. You pull up the lower parts a little bit to make it more linear and more following the target curve, and then you end up having with something like this. Yes, you could tweak it to death. You could get it super linear. But this was based on a 112 octave smoothing. So we still use like 20 bands of EQ for this mid-range first, then more on the pair. But this looked pretty good. There's nothing drastic in this to cry about. Then that was driver side. Again, a lot of boost at the lower mid-range. And then once it became EQ'd, then we ended up with that, which is pretty well matching. Sorry, I had to pop out for a second because Missy started doing her exercise, and yeah, the system in the house is just screaming and you don't want to listen to that. So where were we? So yeah, driver side, same way, has quite a big peak that I had to tame down. And once it was EQ'd, then you end up having something pretty similar to the other side. That's the whole point, making sure the response from left and right is as similar as possible. And when you EQ so much down from the lower mid-range, even if you cross the mid-range low, some people would say, oh, 200 is too low with the 24 dB slow. But then the reality is, to the time you get rid of all that level and you EQ it down, that mid-range hardly sees any power, even if it's crossed low, because of the EQing. EQ is level drop at the same time too, so when you pull down like -6, -8 dB, that mid-range hardly sees any power between 150 and 300, even if it's crossed low at 200. So once left and right was EQ matched, level matched, then they were timed and then measured in a pair, and after that I just treat them as a pair, and we ended up getting something like this, which is pretty good. Started from that and that, ended up getting that with the pair. So once the mid was done, then tweeter. Let's move this a touch. So this was passenger side tweeter, and then after the EQing, boom, that's what we get. So anything that's, you know, higher level away from the target line, that gets pulled down, same way the top end got pulled up a bit, and by then it didn't need much, like plus 3.5 dB to the top end, with different Q levels of EQ bands, and then you end up getting pretty good response up to 19k. There you go. If that's not enough for you, buy a super tweeter that I love so much. So many people know me. I just hate people crying about super tweeters. Rather buy a tweeter that plays the top end properly. People get lost in this high-res madness. Honestly, what you should focus on, what happens between 2-3k up to 16k. That's what matters. That's what you hear. What's above it? Yeah, but I can feel the difference. I don't want to swear again, honestly. But, you know, that's looking great. Very linear. And then the right tweeter, again, you see, you want to match it as close as possible to the other tweeter. That's a lot of level, and especially in the area where your ear is the most sensitive, between 2 and 6k. And if people can't tune, they don't understand the importance of it, or they don't send the car to someone who can tune, then they may find that, oh, I don't like these tweeters, these are pretty harsh. Then what do? They sell it, they buy another one. Do you think in the same location it's gonna work so much more different? Maybe the dispersion character is different on tweeter and it will behave differently in the environment, and the peaks will happen somewhere else, or slightly differently. But overall, the cabin dictates in relation to the location, and that is not the tweeter, it's the environment. That's why you have to tune. You have to deal with the environment. So once that gets EQ'd properly, then you end up getting something very similar to the other side. You get rid of all that peak. That tweeter becomes nice and smooth and natural. It's not harsh at all. Happy days. So once again, yes, driver's side rolls off a bit sooner. There's no point to push so much more energy into it, especially above 16k, because that's not going to affect your staging. Some say, oh yeah, because I have more level on passenger side, that's going to pull the image away to the passenger side. Above 16k, if you can hear that difference, good luck. So once they were timed and playing in a pair, we ended up getting something like this. And then once I had the tweeter pair and the mid-range pair, both timed and set up, then we ended up getting that beautiful summing. And again, you could play with it forever to get it perfectly linear. You can never really get perfect summation all the way up, and you don't even really need it, because again, that's where your ear is really sensitive, between 2 and 6. If you have just 1 or 2 dB dip between, that's perfectly fine. Yes, people always ask me, you know, what target curves I use. I don't use anything. You just need a minimum 3 dB per octave below 200 Hertz, or we will get to that, what we ended up with in this car. But some people like to roll it off above 2 kilohertz. They start to roll it off with 3 dB per octave or even more, and the curve comes down like that. If that's what you like, go for it. That's not transparent, that won't have detail, and nah, that's just dull and boring. If you want to like to listen to systems at like 120, 130 dB with the front end screaming loud because you're deaf, then yes, you may need a target line like that. But if you want to listen to music in the best quality, the way it was recorded on a linear system in a studio, then you want to make sure that you go for a linear target line. Not flat, linear. Please understand the difference. There's a big difference between the two. So tweets were done. Then we ended up with that. So onto mid bass. So we had this passenger side mid bass situation after the crossover point crossed at 60 and up at 200. And once it was EQ'd, here we go. You know, that's a peak. everything gets more linear to the target line. Then right was the problematic area where we have cancellation, but again, that's in relation to the cancellation, that area is a huge peak, so that needs taming. And after the EQ work, I ended up getting something like that, which is not perfect, and it's never going to be perfect. When people want to drag that point up to the same level with the other side, never do that. You just push so much energy into the driver that actually you won't hear. If it's a null point, no matter how much you push into it, +6, +10 dB, it's never really going to come back. And what you will cause, that you will just push your driver at higher listening levels into excursion limitations, or you just push so much energy into the door that it will fall apart, and it will introduce so much rattles, and again, you won't hear the response. If you cry about this, don't start thinking about buying a new speaker. It's not going to change it. It's location related in the car. If you want to make it perfect, relocate the driver. And that's when I like to argue on online forums, on groups, with really clever people when they try to convince so many others that the door location is the best for a mid-bass. Vibrations and rattles is one thing. Some people use a stethoscope and then they go for the last little buzzes, and they just deaden the door to the point that, you know, they spend ages and shitloads of money on it. If you want to enter that game, go for it, or just accept the limitations of a door and be done with it, be happy with it. If you're a competitor and if you want the best, you may want to relocate that driver, change the application, or do whatever you want. Just forget, you know, swapping speakers, because that is location related. Leave it where it is. If you push even more into it, actually it will highlight the problem even further, even better. Again, that's a bit of a cancellation point, so that can never come up enough. Yes, that could be pulled down a touch, but I just left it. And once they were playing together, even if we have this cancellation on driver's side, when they play together, obviously the other side plays it, and you have a pretty good curve. Yes, it could be nicer like that if driver's side was playing that range too. Same way, that bit of a cancellation on driver's side appears in the sum as well. But overall, you know, when they play together, it's very nice. It's pretty good. So in order to deliver that 3 dB per octave rise, you have to have the right level from the mid-bass driver pair. So you may have to play with the level on the pair, the output level or the gain structure in your system. And of course you have to make sure that the speaker pair is in time, not just from left to right, but also the speaker pair to the next speaker pair. So the mid-bass is in time with your mids. And once you do that, then they will sum up beautifully. Look at that. And if they are in not in phase, poof, perfect cancellation. You just flip the polarity and you have complete destruction within, you know, almost an octave from the acoustical crossover point. It just cancels everything out, and it's very easy to hear it. Yes, people keep asking me, how do you do the timing, Pete? How do you do this? How do you do the measurements? What technique you use? What mic technique? What settings? Yes, it's a very complex topic and requires a lot of knowledge, experience, and time invested into it that I can't share with you guys here or anywhere. It's going to be part of a training program I'm working on. Then people will be able to sign up to that and learn it. But as you see, it sums up pretty well. Yes, we would have a nicer curve here again if we didn't have a bit of a cancellation around 150, 160 on driver's side. But overall, speakers were playing nicely together in time and in phase, and the mid bass was up on the dash really nicely. So in phase, yeah, that's what we want. Then on to sub. So as we could see, the sub was peaking a lot in between 42, 48, highest point around 45, 46. So it got EQ'd. So that peak was pulled down. I was pushing the low end a little bit. It got an extra 3 dB on the EQ below 35. So it was helping down to 29 just to get a bit more low end rumble and more linear. And I could help that cancellation just a touch, but again, that's a null point, so there's no point to push so much into it with EQ, because it's not gonna happen. You won't hear it unless you go to the back, you open the trunk, and you will hear that sub pumping crazy in between, you know, 60 and 70, but up front you don't. So once the sub was EQ'd and then timed with the front end, it was working so well. Once it was timed correctly, it was summing up beautifully. And again, that curve could be nicer, more linear, in between 55 and 80. You would have a more linear line if you didn't have a cancellation with the driver's side mid bass in the same area and the sub from the back. So sadly, in this car, and in most hatchbacks to be fair, with the same locations, that 60-70 Hertz range is never really easy, or 60-80, and people are like, oh, I want a bit more upfront kick. It's not happening. It's mainly because of that, the locations in the car. That's when I say, you know, if you want mega mental upfront kick, then have a front sub, and that won't have cancellations between 40 and 80 Hertz, and that will work beautifully. It's a bit more complex because you have an extra speaker to tune, but if you can tune, it doesn't matter how many speakers you have in the system, really. Of course, keep it simple, less to integrate, and it will be more coherent. Some people go for 5-way systems. I had a time in the Honda when I had 5-way in it. Yeah, it was a bit mental, and I could make it work, and many people were shocked when they couldn't tell what was working, what not, and I was just like, does it really matter? Where do you hear things from? Can you image it? Can you separate instruments on the stage? Yeah. So that's it. And again, if the sub wasn't in phase with the front end, poof, you can see from like 120, an octave higher, because it was crossed at 60, an octave higher, it was still affecting the integration with the mid bass. Anything between 45 and 120 was cancelled out if the sub wasn't in phase. Once it's in phase, it sums up pretty nice. Then I only had the rear fill in the car because we were running 6.5 coax at the back doors. The only problem was that we realized that the amplifier, as I mentioned in the previous part, has a filter on it at 1 kilohertz. And even if we had a coax with tweeters, it didn't want to play above, so I had to do a trick with that. But as you can see, the rear fill was very roller coaster like. Even the rear fill, even in differential, needs EQing, because once it was EQ'd, we ended up getting something way more linear with the red line, as you can see. And I was boosting the top end on it a fair bit, so we managed to play it up to 2K. Then it started to roll off shallow with a 6 dB as the filter is built into the amp. But that was fine. It's still playing great effect, adding more ambience and room information to the stereo recording. And the owner wanted that extra feel from the back that you cannot locate. You can't locate. You can tell if it's off, but it's not intrusive. Once you have the right level, the overall rear fill level was a bit lower than this. I had to pull it down at least 3 dB, but then it worked. It worked just fine. It was crossed at 250 and let it play as high as the amplifier was allowing it. So this is how we ended up getting this madness. Don't worry about that. That's the effect of the measurement technique. That's just wind noise coming through the mic. It's not that the system is playing, 5-6 Hertz, so don't worry about that. But this is how we ended up getting this house curve and the rise. As you can see, we had a bit more 61, 66, and then at 50 we had 71. So we had more than 4 dB, roughly 4 dB rise per octave under 200 Hertz. And that was better for the car, the environment, and also the owner who likes to feel the music. If it was a competition car, 4 dB would make the system a little bit boomy. But for everyday drive, especially in a sporty car like this, you may need 4 dB. In some cars I had to do 5 dB per octave to get that extra punch and warmth to the low end. And yeah, the system is pretty good down to 29-30 Hertz with hip hop, especially as the owner likes hip hop. That last little bit between 20 and 30 is such a narrow range in the frequency range, but it makes such a big difference. People can only tell the difference when they have a larger sub, or especially a true IB sub, where the true IB subs just carry on playing naturally, and normally in my car they peak at like 15, so I can just deliver that level with the same amount of rise you need to keep it linear, and it can play down that low so effortlessly. Boxes, normally like in the 6 GT we had the Brahma that could play down to 24 with ease, then started to roll off slowly. 22 was still pretty good in the car, and that's great, you know, that makes a big difference. Or in some cars where we had, some team cars have the Helix Q12W that can deliver the content below 30 Hertz way better than this TW5. Maybe down the line we look into playing around with different subs in his car, but I told to him that for now he should just enjoy it. It's a fantastic system that plays very dynamic. It stages well, pretty transparent, a lot of fun, a lot of headroom, even if some people were worried about the output because those GLMs are not the most powerful. But you use sensitive speakers with it, you put the speakers to locations like on the pillars, mid-range and tweeter, where it's not obstructed by anything, then you get very good healthy level coming out of it. Honestly, you don't want to listen to that system in the Golf for more than half an hour full tilt, because it causes, you know, hearing problems, and you don't want that. Plus, not to mention the fatigue. But if you want to go crazy, you certainly can with this system now, and everything plays together nicely. It's a system, 100%. Some of our clients heard it before it was given back to the client, to the owner, and we should really have a daily system like this. That's, to be fair, what we should have done in the Suzuki as well, because this is achievable for most people. But with the Suzuki we are just going nuts, and we are doing some crazy installation, because that's what PS Sound is about. We are not doing simple things. Well, I mean, this Golf was simple, but if we can, why wouldn't we go crazy? Here we go. That's where we leave it. Hopefully you liked it, guys. Hopefully you learned something from it. As I mentioned, go to description. You can check out other tuning videos, other RTA measurement videos. Also, you find the link to Patreon. Check it out, you won't regret it. And tomorrow I'm gonna bring the video with the owner when we handed the car over, and when he talks about his experience and just everything. You know, I wanted this project to be as transparent as possible to everyone, whether you are a beginner or experienced in car audio, in sound quality. So you all get to see what goes into a great sounding system. So this is it, guys. Feel free to comment, share it, do the usual things. Comment, also subscribe to the channel, because still 49% of the viewers are not subscribed. And spread the word. Also, press the button if you like the video, even if you didn't like it. Press the button, because the more you click on the like button, the more the YouTube algorithm promotes our video and reaches out to the masses, which is rather important for keeping the culture alive and educating more and more people about what this whole madness is about, why we use DSPs, why we emphasize the importance of installation and tuning. This is where the magic is. Cool. Stay tuned, and then tomorrow I see you with the owner of this car. Take care.